created a barrier between the community and the way our community reacts with the police. And it leads to more crime.
Tonight we tell Wisconsin, we tell our country, and we tell people all across the globe that voters really do want leaders who stand up and make the tough decisions.
It's the tools that a pharmacist needs to operate his business. We don't have to spend 30–40% of our time on the phone just verifying prescriptions all day long.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thanks for joining us this Wednesday evening, June 6th. Tonight, we're going to revisit several stories that we here at RFL focused a lot of attention on, and certainly these are all stories that have major updates. Tonight, we're going to bring you the very latest, and we'll begin, of course, with Stop and Frisk. We've been covering this issue all week long, that following, of course, Governor Cuomo getting into the picture here, announcing on Monday that he's calling for the decriminalization of small amounts of marijuana. Tonight, you're going to hear from a young man, a student who, by all accounts, upstanding citizen with a clean record, who's been stopped not once here, but several times in his own neighborhood. And you're going to hear from him, his perceptions of stop and frisk. And then labor pains. We brought you every step of the way through Governor Scott Walker's efforts to roll back workers' rights, efforts that happened. And tonight, we're going to break down the fallout from his big win in Wisconsin. The recall failed in a big way, and its implications in November will definitely be felt. Will this spell trouble not just for the labor unions, but for President Obama come the fall? And later, stopping prescription drug abuse here. We brought you earlier this year, you may remember, an in-depth investigation into the use and abuse of painkillers. It is a problem of epidemic proportions. We saw the tragedy at the Medford pharmacy here, where we had murders on our hands, all as a consequence of this abuse. Well, tonight, we got some good news to report in the fight to stem the tide. I'll be joined by the New York State Attorney General, Mr. Schneiderman, who has been leading the charge. He's got some big news to report. And then religious law, well, you say, well, not in America. You ought to think again. We're going to revisit an insular religious community located only about 30 miles from New York City. You're going to feel as though you stepped into a totally different time and place in, forget about America, just in some other place in this world. It is all coming up in this edition of RFL. But let's begin first with Stop and Frisk.
Young person has a small amount of marijuana in their pocket, and that's a violation. That's a fine. Police officer says, turn out your pockets, and now it's a crime. I mean, who could defend against that?
And I think it's a balanced approach, and it's significant that it supports our quality of life efforts in that smoking it in public or burning it is still a misdemeanor, it's still a crime.
All right, let's get back to a very hotly contested issue, and it's one that we've been covering all week on RFL. It is the NYPD's controversial practice of stop and frisk. Now, some say it's tantamount to racial profiling, while the police department says it cuts down on both crime and also gets guns off the street. What is clear is that according to the New York Police Department's own records, the amount of stop and frisk have increased exponentially over the years. Look at the numbers in 2002. About 97,000 people, they were stopped and frisked, while the vast majority of them, more than 80%, found completely innocent of any crime. Now compare that number to 2011. 700,000 people were stopped and frisked, and for many accounts the number is probably much larger than that. And of those people stopped, nearly 90% of them found to be completely innocent of any crime. Now, one thing the numbers don't show, that only takes into account people considering they were stopped once. Many people we've spoken to have been stopped multiple times and almost exclusively from minority neighborhoods. Now, reporter Kim Lengo, she spoke with one of those young men who was stopped and frisked not once, but on numerous occasions. Kim?
That's right, Rich. And the young man you're about to see has been stopped and frisked in his own neighborhood at least 5 times for what he says is no apparent reason. He's 23, just graduated with his associate's degree, works full-time with underprivileged children, and wants to study political science. He's also black, which he says is the main reason why he's a target for police. You're walking in this direction.
Yes.
What do you have on you at this point?
What I have on me, I have my wallet, my keys.
No bags?
No bags at
Nothing
all.
suspicious?
Nothing suspicious.
And you get in front of this church, and what happens?
Yeah. And I'm stopped. And Frisk. Haven't made it off my block, and I'm stopped.
23-year-old Nicholas Pert has spent his whole life in the Harlem section of Upper Manhattan. About 5 years ago, he started noticing what he, along with critics of the NYPD, call an abuse of police power.
They stopped and frisked me, was handcuffed as well, and put in the back of the police car.
Nicholas also says police took his cell phone, keys, wallet, and ID. The ordeal was physical, aggressive, and embarrassing.
I had to get up against the wall like this.
So you're standing against the wall of a
Yeah.
church like this.
Yeah, and they're frisking me.
Nicholas says the two officers also followed him into his apartment to make sure he lived where he said he lived.
I was in shock. Couldn't believe it. It's a psychological cost that comes along with it. You know, a mental adjustment that just is something that, you know, we will be subjected to.
Despite his shock at the situation, it wasn't the first time or the last time Nicholas would be stopped and frisked. Nicholas says on his 18th birthday, police pulled up in squad cars and ran out with guns drawn, shouting, "Get on the ground." Nicholas says police surrounded his group of friends who were hanging out on 96th Street. 2 years later, Nicholas was stopped again, just after leaving his grandmother's house in Flatbush, Brooklyn. Stopped, frisked, searched, humiliated, and finally let go. Nicholas says that for young people in his neighborhood, getting stopped and frisked has become a rite of passage. Parents teach children, just as Nicholas's mother taught him, don't run and don't try to explain, because as he's been taught, speaking up against a cop could get you arrested or worse.
She told me just to be prepared. Don't be scared, keep your composure, and you know, keep an ID on me.
Regardless of the practice and the frequency of the stops, close to 700,000 stops in the last year, Nicholas says he doesn't feel any safer in the city. In fact, now Nicholas says he thinks police are unfair and abusive.
It's created a barrier between the community and the way our community reacts with the police. And it leads to more crime.
In addition to all the stops that Nicholas says he's endured, among his 10 closest friends, he says the total number of stops rises to more than 50. Nicholas will be a witness in a class action lawsuit against the NYPD over its stop and frisk policy. Rich.
And we, of course, were joined yesterday by the attorney who has now gotten that suit to actually class action status. One of the things you walk away from that is this is systemic. It seems that, as you say, moms or family members tell the kids, all right, this is what you do when stopped. Kids start to decide how to dress better. It almost seems like it's part of routine in certain neighborhoods.
Yeah, well, you know, Nicholas referred to it as a rite of passage, that in addition to teaching kids to do their chores and everything else, parents are now teaching kids how to behave around the police, because it's almost a guarantee in their neighborhood that you're going to be stopped and frisked, if not once, multiple times in your lifetime. You
know, I remember, Kim, in Baltimore, I think it was, but in other cities too, this Stop Snitching campaign. The people in the community is that they didn't want people to cooperate with the police on investigations, even terrible murders and stuff. And I remember saying to myself, I think we did a show, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard here. I mean, this is terrible. And while I still believe it is, when you see stuff like this, you kind of understand where this mentality of the us against them comes from. Where it wasn't the intent of the program, I'm sure, but nobody looks at police, at least from the people we've spoken to, as the welcome wagon here when they come.
Well, you've hit on two key points, and one of the points Nicholas brought up with us is that he knows people in his neighborhood who distrust the police so much that they would rather take a situation into their own hands than call the police, and he says that only leads to more crime. And interestingly, when we were with Nicholas, we stood on the corner and we picked out, you know, several people which would be eligible for these stops because they were wearing baggy clothing or they were carrying a bag.
Don't have a hoodie on.
And it becomes a way of life for them. They know not to wear those kind of things. And when the police roll around the corner, Nicholas almost had a visceral reaction to them. He clammed up because you know something could happen.
All right, Kim, thank you very much.